4 months in the bunker, confined to the dark, eating once every 4 days. Time passes as if by stealth, and I hardly count the days anymore. What a scare every time the food arrives and wakes me up. I am in a trance. With these words, a Holocaust survivor recalled the experience of being a prisoner in the Dachau concentration camp. This site was one of the most important detention centers of the Third Reich, and inside it housed tens of thousands of prisoners who were subjected to the most terrible harassment. Dachau was inaugurated in 1933 and functioned until 1945, the year in which it was liberated. The particularity of this camp lies in the fact that, from its beginnings, it was controlled by the SS, and this Nazi organization designed a chilling way to keep the prisoners at bay. They drafted a penal and disciplinary code, which contained all the punishments to which those who failed to comply with the rules of the camp could be subjected. The inmates lived with the threat of death hanging over their heads. Today, in this new episode of Military History, we'll tell you everything about the punishment suffered by the prisoners at Dachau. To know this story, we must first understand how the concentration camps of the Nazi regime worked. Initially, the first centers did not have unified regulations, and each one administered the sanctions at its discretion. Punishments consisted of a hard bed, denial of food, and solitary confinement in a dark cell, but physical punishment was rare. This changed forever in May 1933, when the SS, who were in charge of the Dachau camp, drew up the legal code detailing what was to be done when a prisoner broke the rules of the establishment. Theodor Eicke, a Nazi officer in charge of directing Dachau, was largely responsible for designing the Dachau Penal and Disciplinary Code. Those who knew him claimed that Eicke was a blind fan of National Socialism, a man willing to make the camp a place of suffering for prisoners in order to re-educate them. The idea that guided the director of the establishment was that, with an adequate dose of mistreatment and sanctions, the inmates would abandon their opposition to Nazism and become worshippers of Hitler. In the event that they refused to abandon their ideals and strictly obey the regulations of the camp, these people could be executed. The lightest punishment at Dachau was confinement in a cell. The regulations of the field described the situations for which a person could suffer this penalty. The inmates had to get up from their bunks every morning, as soon as the guards woke them up, and immediately tidy up the barracks where they slept. No one could wear civilian clothes, only the prisoner uniform could be worn, and they were not even allowed to wear underwear. Lying during an interrogation was prohibited, as was filing false reports, or writing more than 2 letters per month. Whoever broke any of these rules would be confined in the dark for a few days. The dreaded dungeons at Dachau were individual cells with a surface area of 80 centimeters per side. In this tiny space, the inmates could spend between 3 and 42 days, in a narrow hole inside which they had no ability to move. They had to stand, and sitting down was next to impossible. Inside, oxygen was scarce, and as the testimony at the beginning of this video indicates, the food ration was delivered once every 4 days. The inmates nicknamed these cells bunker, in which many died due to the appalling conditions of confinement. The punishments became harsher as the crimes became, according to the Nazis, more serious. For example, those who approached a doctor for treatment without sufficient reason or who pretended to be ill to avoid their daily tasks were punished with time in cells, in addition to several weeks of forced labor. When the authority of the guards was put into play, the most direct violence came into action. Teasing or insolent comments towards a member of the SS were punishable by 50 lashes on the back. The Nazis had no tolerance for actions that put the order of the concentration camp at risk. Any hint of conspiracy, rebellion, or agitation was punishable by death. Acts considered destabilizing included making inflammatory speeches in front of other inmates, smuggling outside items, and concealing items of clothing and objects that could be used as weapons, such as rocks or knives. Most unforgivable of all, however, was trying to escape from Dachau. These actions were punished with a public hanging, so that the other inmates could see what fate awaited them if they wanted to escape from the concentration camp. Assaulting an SS officer, refusing to follow the orders of the guards, or failing to perform forced labor duties had an equally grim result. The rebel was to be executed on the spot with a shot, and then his corpse was hung in public. The same was true when someone caused a fire or explosion, damaged telephone wiring lines, or broke water pipes. All this was considered sabotage and was punishable by death. In the event that the destruction of property occurred due to negligence and not intentionally, the person responsible was sent to individual confinement in the bunker. Theodor Eicke, the director of Dachau, wanted to keep the honor of the Nazi movement clean, and therefore it was strictly forbidden to bribe SS guards with gifts or money, discuss politics, claim communism, criticize the Third Reich or speak ill of Hitler. These insults were punished with permanent confinement in individual cells, until the inmate died there from exhaustion or starvation. By no means were these people released before their time. Finally, the Dachau Penal and Disciplinary Code described a series of complementary punishments in order to maximize the suffering of prisoners. Mandatory exercise sessions were suggested, such as making them run until they fainted, forbidding them to write or receive letters, forcing them to sleep on hard beds, or tying their wrists behind their backs and hanging them by their hands from a pole, dislocating their shoulders. Eicke's career took off from his Dachau administration, eventually commanding an SS division on the Eastern Front when Germany invaded Russia in 1941. There, Eicke was noted for the brutality of his methods and for committing numerous crimes of war, such as the indiscriminate killing of prisoners. In 1943, while on a reconnaissance flight, his plane was hit by Soviet artillery. The ship crashed to the ground and Eicke died instantly. As for the Dachau camp, it continued to function until April 29, 1945, when the United States Army liberated it. The American soldiers were horrified by what they found inside. The corpses of inmates murdered in cold blood by the Nazis were piled up in the establishment. The U.S. troops reacted by killing the surrendering SS prison guards. After the liberation, the establishment continued to function as a residence for war refugees. Later, its facilities were converted into a commemorative museum, where the horror of what happened inside is remembered. We have reached the end of the video, and we want to ask you, what do you think was the most brutal punishment in this concentration camp? Leave us your answer in the comment box below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.